Welcome to the Mary Mac Show, where we will be talking about your feelings, experiences, and pain following the death of a loved one. Hello, my family and friends. This is Mary Mac of the Mary Mac Show. I am so fortunate to welcome Rebecca Kiessling with me today. She is an attorney and an individual who you will find amazing for all that she has endured and all the activism she has developed for those who have been raped and impregnated by the rapist. She also had several children in her life. Some she adopted, some she conceived and miscarried, but her two sons were killed by fentanyl, and we will talk about that as well. So I'd like to introduce Rebecca to you, and I'm grateful that she's here with me today. So thank you, Rebecca, for being with me.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
The qualifications, the things that you've done in your life, the sorrows that you've endured, I'm amazed that you're still standing. Truly, I mean, you're a remarkable woman. You have done so much for so many, all the while enduring the suffering that you yourself endure, even to this day. So would you tell us a little bit about your growing up years and your history and how you came to be involved with all that you have, especially in the pro-life movement? You speak to organizations about this. You also help victims of rape and make sure that their rapists do not get parental rights. There's so much we can speak about, but I'm going to leave the floor open to you.
Okay. And jump in and ask me questions whenever,
Okay, great.
So I was adopted, and I was 6 weeks old when my parents got me. Which actually, once I had children and 6 weeks went by, I realized, like, wow, that's actually a long time. And it's kind of weird to think, like, I have no idea where I was those first 6 weeks of my life, who took care of me. The family that I was raised in, I had an older brother, and my adoption story was really infertility centered. So my parents didn't give me any kind of big picture foundation of why I was here, just sort of, to meet their needs. And I knew that if they could have had biological children, like, they wouldn't have wanted me. I was sort of second best last resort. And that
Did you
family
feel
was
that
really,
way? Did you always feel that way?
at a young age, I didn't realize I had a birth mother. Like, they talked about adoption, like I was just chosen and there was a room full of babies and they picked me up. I remember in elementary school, like lower elementary school, learning about pregnancy and thinking, this doesn't apply to me because I wasn't born, I was adopted. In fact, I would cry to my parents and ask them, why didn't you adopt me first? Because my brother was a year and a half older than me, used to beat me up all the time. And I thought if I'd been adopted first, I would be older than him. I thought you are as old as you are adopted, like not born, and that family was abusive. My brother was extremely abusive. He ended up being 6'6". He was in and out of jail and prison most of his life. And he started getting into trouble at a young age, but My grandfather beat my grandmother. There was like, my dad was raised in that. So there was a lot of chaos. My mom was bipolar, undiagnosed, and unmedicated until I was 30,
Oh my
when,
goodness.
we petitioned to have her committed and went through all of that. And then my dad like broke my nose when I was in high school. And they were Jewish, although they lived as atheists. My dad is a devout atheist, but Jewish identity. And I went to like 5 years of Hebrew school 3 days a week. And I was bullied at school. The Jewish kids didn't accept me. I was called a bastard. And it was, it was difficult.
Mhm.
Um, when things were good, they were really good. When things were bad, they're really bad. So I can look back and see the good in my life. Like, um, my parents were into health and fitness, so we ate healthy. I got to be in lots of sports and lots of activities. They valued education. Obviously I became an attorney. So, I can look at those things. Like, we would go for family walks. My dad would do spelling bees with us. I played chess with my dad, and did a lot of board games and Scrabble. And my dad and I did, New York Times crossword puzzle dictionary together. So, I mean, there's
Wow.
like a lot of things
High
that they did.
level. That's high level.
Yeah, so there's like a lot of things that they did right. But then, when things were bad, they were really bad.
And how were your graduate school years when you were going through law school? Were you happy? Did you go away to school?
Um, so I ended up in abusive relationships. I actually I wanted to meet my birth mother, and I learned at 18 how I was conceived. And at 19, I met her and learned the horrible details. And even though she really wanted to meet me, she told me that if abortion had been legal, she would have aborted me. And in fact, years later, shared that she went to 2 illegal abortions and I was almost aborted, but she backed out because of the conditions and the fact that it was illegal. So she didn't go through with the process, but um, I struggled with those issues of just feeling completely forsaken by everybody.
Sure.
And, you know, the way I acted out, my brother, he was doing drugs, started smoking at a young age. And my parents didn't have alcohol in the house except for like the high holidays. But my dad let him try beer in middle school. Like that was gonna show him that it doesn't taste good. And my brother said he was an alcoholic from that time forward. And he was like freebasing cocaine, and he tried to molest me when he was high. It was chaotic. And I didn't act out the way my brother did. Like, I saw his example, and that's not at all what I wanted to do, but it was sort of like with dating, you know, trying to sort of find someone who would love me, and ended up, my own dysfunctional relationships. And I ended up in some abusive relationships, and I was beat up by a boyfriend from law school. He broke my jaw. I eventually lost my front tooth. Later had my smile restored as part of the Give Back a Smile program for victims of domestic violence. But I had hit rock bottom. That's when I was invited back to church again and gave my life to Christ. And that really helped with, so much of my issues, learning what is my true identity, value, purpose, healed over like a lot of wounds. Learning that, I'm not, the rapist is not my creator. God created in his image for a purpose, for
Yes.
good, not for evil. Though
Yeah.
my mother and father forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Um, I decided I wanted to adopt not second best last resort, but it's in the spirit of adoption that we're all called to be God's children through Christ. So I felt called to adopt. Didn't know I would experience infertility at all. And I did 4 years of infertility, and
Oh,
found a pro-life fertility doctor who doesn't do IVF or refer for abortions or any of that. It was very important to me, not to go to a place that, doesn't respect life.
sure.
I didn't want to go to somebody who destroys it, human life on a daily basis, like
Right.
destroying embryos and things like that. So, um, but we adopted Caleb when we were only married a year. And then also adopted Cassie. She was born a month early, so 6 months after Caleb, just like that. And then we got Caleb's half brother, and they were 20 months apart. And then we had a foster child who we ended up having to, after 2 years, had to find a new home for her. We were going to adopt her, but she was struggling, acting out with issues. We didn't know, we knew how she had been abused. And so we actually had to find another home for her. And so it was like a lot.
I think so. All at once, they must have been all very young then.
Yeah, yeah. And Kate, the foster child, she ended up being the oldest. She was 20 months old. So it was just like that. It was a lot, super fast. And then found this pro-life fertility doctor and got pregnant the first month. Um, so and Cassie, our second adopted child, was born with a serious genetic disorder. And a doctor took her off of oxygen when she wasn't ready to be, and she stopped breathing. She was resuscitated a couple of times, stopped breathing again. And then they couldn't keep her blood pressure up. And we lost Cassie at 33 days old. Um, so, grief right away. Um, you know, Definitely faith, like, helped me get through. Um, yeah, it was super horrific. I said, I don't know how people get through life, get through grief, like, without faith.
Oh, that's right.
My adoptive father was kind of a nihilist, um, to think that that's it. We're all kind of crash landing, lights out, that there's nothing more, just darkness. It's just, and that was kind of all my Jewish family was kind of like that. I remember when my aunt died, and um that was like shortly after Cassie died, and they just like um I don't know, it's just really different. And my Jewish family, who had mocked my faith for years at Cassie's funeral, were saying, what you have is really special, like, don't lose that, don't lose your faith. um
Was this your aunt
but
on your mom's side or your dad's side?
on my dad's side, it was my great aunt had died, my grandmother's sister.
Oh,
And they um interestingly were reading, you know, the passage from Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and it says, though I walk through the
the
valley of the
valley of the
shadow,
shadow of
right,
death.
right. And I will fear no evil, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So, and then they're talking about their grandmother being in heaven. So all these like atheist cousins and family members are like quoting scripture about everlasting life, and that was really interesting. um
Yeah, I would think so because the one thing that I always explain to people is all the ones who have had near-death experiences and come back to tell you about it. And I always believe that's God's way of confirming for us that I'm here. This is here for you when it's your time.
yeah, Then they, people say a lot of stupid stuff though, like after losing Cassie, like, oh well, at least you have other children, or
Oh
at least you have
yeah.
Caleb. At least you have
Oh
Caleb.
yes. Yes. Or
Um,
you could have more.
you could have more, and also, um, well, she had a genetic disorder, so this is God's plan. And it's like you wouldn't, and I would tell people you wouldn't say if your child was murdered, if someone's child was murdered, you wouldn't say, well, it's God's plan, it's God's timing, you know? And there was malpractice involved. The doctor screwed up, like she shouldn't have died. So there was no kind of like peace that this just happened naturally. I mean, um, but I wasn't gonna sue him. I'm an attorney. I know how that goes. I'm not gonna go through mediation and have mediators saying, well, what was the value of her life? What was her life expectancy? How much money could she have earned in her life? Like, I know how they do that, how they,
Hmm.
put a number on someone's life. Like, I didn't want to go through all that. So I didn't sue. But out of all the specialists that she had, like it was that doctor, she was the only one who didn't show up at her funeral. Yeah. I've got one of my dogs in my lap. So if you wonder what's going
Oh,
on.
tell me.
So this is actually a new dog because we lost our other dog a few weeks ago, and this was kind of a great scenario. These two little girls, these two little doggies, they're a year and 10 months, and I had a friend who was going to breed them, had started, she got three dogs, and it wasn't working out for her, and so it's nice they're house trained, and they're like my therapy dogs, right?
Mhm.
So they're sisters. One's bigger than the other. One's 17 pounds, and this is Nellie, and then Natalie is 9 pounds.
Oh, nice names. I like that.
Yeah, I didn't name them. The names are too close. I think it's actually a problem. I don't think Natalie knows her name, so we're gonna go with Nat. Try to train her. Yeah,
There's nothing more comforting than a dog, I think, when you're grieving. I I had
yeah,
two dogs in my adult life, and both of them took me through some of the most difficult grieving periods in my life. And I
yeah,
was forever grateful to both of them, and I still miss both of them. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and Zorro had been, Caleb he was like the alpha, and Zorro actually started leaving the yard, like he was looking for Caleb for a few,
Yeah.
for quite a while after we had to watch. And it was like he wanted to know where he was. So, you know, he was old, he was 15 and a half, and Zorro took a turn for the worse, like all of a sudden, like he had basically it's like vertigo, and then he rebounded, and then things got he had another episode, and then he couldn't even stand and couldn't, and it we tried medication, and you know within 6 days we had to take him to the vet. And
Yeah.
gosh, doing that, it was horrifying because they explained the process, and they said, they're going to give him this injection. First they'll put him to sleep, but then they would give him an injection. They said basically it's like we're gonna give him an overdose and his heart will stop. And I just
Oh,
said, I can't be in the room for that. So my girls stayed in the room and my ex-husband stayed in the room, but I had to leave. I couldn't watch that. But I came in and I wish I had seen ah, just thinking about my boys. It's horrifying, and dogs and pets are different. Um my boys though, were healthy, and this was done to them. It should have never happened. And you don't do
Tell me
that to
their
people.
names. Tell me their names.
Caleb and Tyler, they had the
And they,
same birth mother. So we
okay.
got Caleb from birth, and we got Kyler when he was um a year old, like right after his first birthday. His biological father had tried to drown him when he
Ooh,
was high on heroin. It Their birth mother, Nicole, was doing heroin during her pregnancy with Kyler.
oh my
And we were
goodness.
told that Caleb was conceived in rape. We were told that it was a date rape drug. She was 16. But she had already like been in a lot of trouble. She was at a rave party. She'd been kind of out of control. Her grandmother had sent her to stay with some nuns for a while,
Oh, wow.
but her mother had been a drug addict. The grandmother was like actually a pro-life activist. The grandparents were, but their birth mother's mother was the oldest in her family, and she had struggled with substance use disorder and had been using heroin um and Nicole's father died when she was young. He died in his late 30s from heart failure related to alcohol abuse. And his father died in his 30s, heart failure related to alcohol abuse. So,
Oh,
my boys grew up like hearing all the warnings about their birth family and how important it is never to experiment with drugs or alcohol.
right.
And then my ex-husband like had become an alcoholic, and the boys knew that he was drinking and hiding it, and uh, passing out at night when I'm out of town speaking. And they're the ones who alerted to me when they were in middle school as to what was going on. Um, so, I had tried, like, the boys got more warnings than most people ever get.
Sure.
And then I gave my ex-husband an ultimatum, and he stopped drinking, and he ended up getting involved in Celebrate Recovery at church and ended up heading up Celebrate Recovery. But he was gone 3 days a week with that. And I think he's like needed him a lot. And I think Caleb went once to Celebrate Recovery. Kyler wouldn't go because it's like the rules there are that you have to want to go, right? So you can't just take them. Um,
Is this like an inpatient or is this like a meeting?
no, it's just like, I don't know, maybe like AA, but they're, sort of 12-step program type of thing is entirely faith-based.
Okay.
And there's, kind of like a Bible study and, support, and they share their stories, and they have teachings, and they have small groups, they have large groups, and they have a mentor. So you meet with like a mentor once a week, and you have the large group once a week, and you have your small groups once a week. So it's like 3 days a week, but if you needed every day, you could go to other locations nearby. And he wanted to do something that was faith-based, because I gave him an ultimatum: get into AA, or, I'm going to file for divorce. And because he had driven with the kids in the car on a couple of occasions.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and he never drank again.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he's, in many respects, like, I felt like he was an enabler. I mean, big time, kind of like really passive, um, with the kids and the marriage. And I will say now, he's like learned from his mistakes, and now he's taking people right to rehab. People that are attending, if they need help and they see that they're like now he knows like the stakes that someone could die. So he's driving them to rehab, and he knows where to take them. And they never had Narcan like training at Celebrate Recovery. Now they do Narcan training. They have Narcan there. You know what I mean? So he's learned. I mean, I've learned, gosh, there's so much like I didn't know.
Sure.
When vaping started, I didn't know what that was. Finding these cartridges, I had no clue what it was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, I don't know, is this another kind of like MP3 player? Like, I had no clue what it was. So they were all different shapes. They didn't all look the same. Like,
Mm-hmm.
is this a battery? And that's what my boys would tell me, that it's some electronic advice. Oh, this goes to my so and so. Oh, this is a charger. This is I didn't know what vaping was when they were in middle school, but that was like their first drug.
And now they
And
say that it's even worse than cigarettes as far as
yeah.
what it can do to your lungs.
And then they would tell me that, oh, it's just vape, it's water vape, it's water vape. And then, they did something at school in the middle school with the sheriff deputy on like vaping and educating parents. And that's when I learned like what this really is, and about the nicotine and how powerful. And um, it was like, I mean, the world changed so fast, you know? And then my son later told me that they started vaping on a visit with their birth mom. She had been clean for several years, and so we started, we had some contact with her, and
Was she still addicted at that point?
she stopped doing drugs, but she struggled with alcohol. So like there was one visit we went and she was drunk, and they wanted to stay and hang out with their uncles. So they had an uncle who was 3 years older than Caleb, and he actually he's the one who introduced them to vaping. And
Mm.
I didn't know what was going on. I didn't realize that they struggled with addiction. And that uncle had been at their funeral, and he died a month after my boys did.
Also
Um,
from fentanyl?
Yes, but he was doing fentanyl on purpose. So he was found with a fentanyl patch on his arm. And then their birth mother died 6 months after that.
Oh my God. Also from fentanyl?
I don't know. Her mother won't say.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And, we went to a funeral for the uncle, and the mother kept saying, this is so horrible, losing my baby, losing my youngest. I can't imagine you lost two. I can't imagine what it's like losing two. She kept saying that. And then she did, you know. And then one of her other sons was also an addict. And the oldest son stayed clear. He's not. Yeah, he wasn't the oldest son. He was actually the third child in their family, but he was clean. So, um, yeah,
And how do you know or have you learned how both of your sons were introduced to fentanyl or other drugs before?
yeah. So my son Caleb told me he'd been, clean off stuff for a while. So, and he was a brilliant child, just really brilliant. He, my mother-in-law wanted to know when he was a baby, like, what words is he saying? How many words does he have? And he was 10 months old, because I told her he talks a lot. He says a lot of words. And she asked me, oh, what words? So I started writing them down. He had 80 words,
Wow.
80 words at 10 months old, clear as a bell. He could say octopus, like that was one of his toys. Like, and when he was 18 months old, it was 9/11. We'd been on a trip out west, and we drove home, and a week later went to a rally, and they were playing all of the armed forces songs, like all the patriotic songs. They had the armed forces medley, and we listened to all of that in the car all the time. I had a patriotic CD for him. He was super patriotic. He wanted to go into the military, and um, he'd been accepted into the Navy. He had a 90 um, on the military test, and which means 90th percentile. And that was a year and a half out of school without studying, um and he told me he was high on marijuana when he did the test, and he scored a 90. And so his life would have been set. I mean, he would have had a really high pay right away, and the only job he couldn't have with a 90 was like nuclear engineer on a nuclear sub, but other than that, he could have had any career in the Navy. He'd always wanted to go into the to to become a naval officer, go into the academy. He had AP history in 10th grade and had it all planned out what he would take to go into the Navy. And then things turned really fast. But going back to when he was, I'm scattered right now. Going back to when he was 18 months old, we were at this rally and he knew all the words to all the patriotic songs and he was belting them out. And people were looking, saying, how old is he?
Yeah.
Tyler didn't start talking until he was 3 years old. He only had like a few words. And here's Caleb at 18 months old, just speaking in full sentences and knowing all the lyrics, all these songs. It was like freakishly brilliant. And Kyler was a daredevil, fearless. He climbed out of his crib in the foster home at 10 months old.
Wow.
And instead of getting him like a dome tent like we did, where you zip it, to keep kids in their crib when it's not safe for them to be climbing out, they had to make sure that he couldn't get hurt. So they actually put him in a car seat every night and strapped him in so he couldn't even roll over,
Oh
which
my
is
goodness.
really dangerous for kids. I mean, my parents tethered my brother, and that's what doctors used to tell people to do. But there's studies that show that tethering is really detrimental to a kid's mental health and well-being. They need to be able to roll over, and they shouldn't be like sort of chained like a dog.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, you don't even do that to dogs now, right? You put them in a crate where they can move.
Move.
But
Yeah.
so he did a lot of death-defying things from a young age, and you know, Caleb learned to ride his bike at 5. Kyler learned the next day, like 3.5 years old, and he didn't know how to stop. So it was trying to teach him to stop and not just crash was rough. He drank a bottle of Benadryl when he was young, and we had to get him. They gave him like charcoal at the hospital, and
Yes.
then he drank a bottle of allergy medication, and almost died. By the time we discovered it, it was too late. His blood pressure was not good, and obviously he survived. But we had to have locks on everything. He found where the key was. He climbed up. I mean, oof, he got a pickaxe when he was like, I don't know, 5 years old, 4.5, and he comes running in. I chopped my toe off. I chopped my toe off, and there was just blood everywhere, and we had to get it stitched back up. And he would just do all of these things that he just was fearless. But it skateboarding, he was unbelievable. I mean, he would go flying off these huge ramps and do flips and twists, and you know, he was a gross motor kid. He would never play. Caleb was really into like Legos and intricate things and building um and reading. Whereas Kyler, he couldn't focus. I mean, he definitely had ADHD, but at a young age, at 3, someone explained that it's called sensory integration dysfunction. So we tried everything and got him therapy, um, with occupational therapy for sensory integration dysfunction, because his vestibular sense was out of whack. He would crash into walls.
Oh,
He'd
wow.
fall out of his chair all the time. Um, he couldn't do like fine motor stuff. Struggled with that. Um, he couldn't. You tried to teach him A, B, C with flashcards, and 5 years old he was struggling,
Wow.
to recognize the letters and repeat it. And then one day my mother-in-law was visiting from out of state, and he's riding his bicycle outside on the patio, and she's doing it with my daughter, who's like almost 2 years younger, and she's doing A, B, C, and 1, 2, 3. And my mother-in-law turns while he's riding, and she goes, "Hey, Kyler." And while he's riding, he's like, all of a sudden he recognizes it. It's like it cleared the clouds away, and he's like, A, B, C, like, and he knew it because he was moving. So yeah, we worked on that kind of stuff, and I homeschooled the kids. When he got free preschool because he was like an at-risk kid. So with the government, if you have one or more biological parents in jail, if you were drug exposed in utero, if you were abused, his biological father, like I said, was high on heroin and tried to drown him. He stopped breathing um, at 9 weeks old, and that's when he went into foster care. So he met a lot of those factors, but the preschool teacher said it was the first time in the history of decades of teaching that a child paid attention to where she hid the fish food, and he climbed up and dumped it all in and killed all the fish. You know,
Oh my God.
he was just and he was always so sorry, and he would cry and cry and cry. Um, but he got into stuff. I joke that he was Curious George, Messy Marvin, and Dennis the Menace, like all wrapped into one. And that he was like not just all boy, he was like a boy on steroids. Like he just got into stuff and did stuff and was, and this is horrible now. Horrible. But I used to joke that our goal as parents was to get him through his childhood, without dying and without accidentally killing someone else. Because he did so many death-defying things, and we had so many trips to ER. And he was funny too. He was really funny. He made people laugh, and he was full of joy. He had the greatest giggle. Um, he was my number one helper. He loved to help. And Caleb was an introvert, and Kyler was an extreme extrovert. So they shared a room. I'm actually in their room right now. For a few years, I couldn't come in here, and my friend helped me. He patched all the walls and repainted, and now it's like an office and guest room, and we can put a movie projector up, and then the kids will watch stuff. My daughters will watch stuff in here and bring their friends in, and it's become a place that we can, enjoy. And I just think the boys would really like this room. They would think it's really cool. But Caleb wanted to move out of this room like in middle school. He wanted to move to the basement, which now I feel like that was a big mistake. Um, it was just too isolating for him, I think. I get that he didn't want a room with his brother, but I think they both kind of got into a lot of trouble on their own, like having too much privacy in a way. At one point, my ex-husband actually took the door off of this room and took the doors off the closet because of Kyler getting into trouble and hiding things. And um I was like I was always the bad guy, the one going into their rooms and inspecting and finding stuff. Caleb said it started with vape, but then quickly progressed. They were putting other things inside the vape pens, THC,
Wow.
and then in high school they were getting kids were doing marijuana. They had brownies. I found brownies. Caleb said he was a mule, that other kids were paying him to bring it up. Like, I go
Wow.
to the I go to the sheriff deputy. I ask for help. He's like, don't bring that in or I'm gonna have to make an arrest. I'm like, what happens if you make an arrest? And he's like, well, if your kids go to juvie, you have to pay. And here's how much it is a night. And it would be financially devastating. I think there's no real option for parents. There was a state school I wanted to send Kyler to, and the state would pay for it, but it had to be voluntary. And I'm like, my ex-husband took my son to the orientation, but I said to him, how do you think other parents do it? You make it where they volunteer. You don't enable them. you know, you make it so they have to go. Yeah, as far as the state's concerned, it's voluntary, but the parents got to make it happen. You think all those kids are going there, all these at-risk kids who are struggling with substance use disorder, are all going there like voluntarily? No, and so we were not on the same page with anything. He was like, even though they had chores, cleaning day was Saturdays. And so he wanted the house clean when he was home, but the kids learned that they didn't have to listen to me, didn't have to do what I said, didn't have to do their chores. And then when I would go in and find stuff, they'd swear at me and they'd say, Daddy didn't care, Daddy didn't care. When he would undo whatever, punishment I had, they'd laugh. Um, I think any parent who's dealt with substance use disorder with their kids, like, they know there's some ugly times. Um, he put a lock on our bedroom door so that I could lock up my purse, like I was the problem. And then when they stole my credit card and they kept finding ways to steal it, he wanted me to have a locking wallet. And I just like flipped. And that I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I filed for divorce. And I mean, at this point, this is like 9 months before they died. Like, I didn't know what they were doing, but they were now stealing thousands, you know. And I found out from their girlfriend from Kyler's girlfriend afterwards that they had been doing cocaine at that point, and that they were saying, like, Kyler had been saying how expensive it was. And I'm like, I can't live like this. I can't live knowing that I'm funding their habit and you're not doing anything. Like, I beg him to take them to rehab. And the boys got, I told my ex to move out and take the boys with you. And when I said I was filing for divorce, like, he was looking for an apartment, and then he got one, but he didn't move in with them. And I'm like, you can't leave them alone. They need you. And he's like, well, if you're for filing for divorce, I'm not leaving. And we negotiated our divorce. I'd been a divorce attorney, and I wanted to be good to him because he's, the father of my daughters and my sons. And but he just left them in this apartment, and they lost their jobs, and I don't know how they were surviving, what was going on. But um they got in trouble. And first my son got in trouble because I was told he was high on Xanax, and he attacked my ex-husband and his brother and someone else, and he got charged. And then came to live with me because he needed a place to live. And then he they got in trouble again because he went back with his brother. And they apparently tried to get in the back door of a jewelry store, and there was a camera, and they didn't open the door. They just kind of jiggled it. They didn't like really try to break in, but and then turned around and left and tried to open the truck door too. And you could see in the video that they were like under the influence of something. And the detective ended up telling me that my son told them that they were doing Xanax. Well, I have another family member in my family who does Xanax, who's on Xanax, prescribed. Like,
Yeah.
you don't die from Xanax.
Anxiety. No,
Yeah,
no.
you don't die from Xanax. Like I thought, my son told me it started in ninth grade. They were getting it. Kids were bringing pills to school from their parents' unlocked medicine cabinets.
Brother.
And that's when he got hooked in ninth grade. He got hooked on pills, a bunch of different pills. And so, like, when my son Kyler had surgery for his knee, I told the doctor, no opioids. I mean, I knew, Caleb had struggled. I knew their family history, no opioids. And I knew enough to be super diligent with that, knowing it could destroy people's lives. Like, I didn't think it could kill you,
Right.
but I knew it could like destroy lives, right? And so this detective, he actually called me a week after my boys died to wish me condolences. I had spent an hour with this guy. I made him I made masks during COVID, and I'm a quilter, so I made him like a law enforcement
Aw,
mask
how
with law
nice.
enforcement fabric. And I'm like, did you know that the Xanax on the street is not real Xanax? Like I thought people are like that it's the number one thing that people steal from houses. I thought they were getting it from somebody or somebody selling it to them from their parent. Like I didn't know that they're getting something like on the street. Like that's not even Xanax. Like I learned it's Xanax isn't Xanax, it's Tizolam, which is not legal in the US, but it's also not Schedule C. Like all this stuff, like I didn't know anything, but and that Xanax, there's a lot of people whose kids die from fake Xanax that has fentanyl.
Right.
My boys died from fake Percocets. Um, that was all fentanyl, had no Percocet in it. It's not laced. I hate the term laced. It's not laced. It was all fentanyl with some fillers. And I asked him, did you know about fentanyl? Did you know that like Xanax, like those fake pills are not even Xanax and they have fentanyl in it, kids are dying? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, did you know about Narcan? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me? Wait, I spent all that time with you. You told me that my son told you that he was getting Xanax and he was getting it from Pontiac and he'd ride his bike. Like, why didn't you tell me any of this? And he's like, I didn't think of it. And I don't know, I just feel like my boys fell through the cracks in so many different ways. Um, they got, they went to jail. They got clean in jail immediately. My son Caleb just cried his heart out and just said to me, Mom, you're my superhero. He's like, you always cared. You were the one who always went in our room and found stuff and you cared. And he's like, you're my superhero. And he just said, Mom, please just don't abandon me. Just please don't abandon me. And I feel like I did because I left it up to their dad to take them to rehab. And instead he took them to a motel, left them there, put the room and this girls, and I didn't even know that these young people were there when they arrived. I wonder when I found out all these young people were there. A 17-year-old girl died with my boys. And the drug dealer had overdosed. He was saved by Narcan. Turns out a month before he had overdosed and he was saved by Narcan. So he knew he was getting deadly stuff. And his girlfriend, who had been there, she had overdosed a couple months before and was saved by Narcan. And it was drugs he had given her. Um, And I didn't know, like, when did all these young people arrive, you know? And it was 5 months later, the girl testified that the room was because you had to be 21 or older, and that Mr. Kiessling, when he brought them all there, he knew they were all high in there to party, and he didn't want to be liable for damages to the room. So he didn't want the room in his name, and he paid for the room. And then when he made arrangements with my sons, he talked to them like 1 in the morning or something, that they would talk first thing in the morning, and he would pick them up, and he told them they were going to go look at this apartment that he was going to move in with Kyler. And that he was just kind of, I guess he was going to trick them and then just take them to rehab. Um, he didn't feel he could find a place at night to take them. Now he knows where to take them, that there's places you can take them at night, you
Mhm.
know. But he was going to research it and take them somewhere the next day. But when he didn't hear from them, like, he didn't call me. He didn't say, I'm worried about them. They're not answering. He was across town working, so he didn't go. He didn't call the motel. He didn't call the police to go check on them. Like, he just left them there until he got a call at 5 in the afternoon saying that they were dead.
My God.
The girl, when she woke up, she had passed out from fake Xanax. And you see my boys like helping her. In the video, you could see them helping her down the hall because she was like messed up. And it was my two sons, not her boyfriend, the drug dealer, but my two sons helping her. And because that's the kind of kids they were. I mean, we had their friends come over after the funeral, and everybody was telling stories how they met them, and so many kids met them at the church group because they were alone, and any kid who was alone, they brought them over. Other kids at school met them at the school dance because they were alone, and my boys didn't want them to be alone, so they brought them over. So they, like, they were loving, kind kids,
Big
to all
hearts.
these other kids.
Big
And
hearts.
yeah, and so there they were helping her, my two sons and her, she's in the middle. And I saw that footage. But when she woke up the next morning, she called a friend, and I know this because my son's friend was friends with this girl and told them what happened. And so she woke up, saw them all dead, called her friend and said, "Oh my gosh, they're all dead." And her friend said, "You have to call the police." Neither one of them called the police.
Oh my goodness.
She she went and got breakfast. She went back. She washed her hair.
Oh
Um,
my
and
goodness.
then until the girl's parents, like the girl was missing, she lied about where she was. The other girl who died, she lied about where she was to her parents, and so they were able to track her phone finally. And like, just before 5, the girl saw the police there, and so she goes in and she's like, "Oh, there's a girl with that name in my room." She takes them up to the room, and she doesn't come out, and then they start banging on the door, and she finally comes out crying. But she just let them die. Like, and that's a lesson. Like, these kids think, like, so many other parents in the support groups I met who lost their kids, these kids think they're partying with their friends. Like, they're not your friends. They don't care about you. They're just going to leave you to die. She knows about Narcan. She was saved with Narcan. Her boyfriend was saved with Narcan. She knows Narcan can save their lives, and she just lets them die. But the police gave a plea deal to the drug dealer, um, because after that girl's testimony, they felt that any jury would blame my ex-husband more, that he should have been the responsible adult. And so instead of serving 25 to life in prison for what's a capital offense, in Michigan, we have a drug-induced homicide law that's strict liability. If you provide a deadly, a lethal drug to someone, they die, it's a capital offense. Instead, he was given a plea deal, and he's serving 8 to 15 years for killing 3 people, 3 kids. Um, the girl was 17 years old. Tyler was 18 and Caleb was 20. And my ex-husband called me, like it was like 9 p.m. and I just screamed. I'm like, both, both. I called their birth mother. She had bailed Caleb out. Okay, so they both had gone to jail. They repented in jail. Caleb immediately, you know, the whole thing of you're my superhero and all of that, and just please don't abandon me. And he's like, when I call, just please leave me. Don't talk to me every day. But yeah, it was COVID. We weren't allowed to visit, right? So it was calls. And Tyler, it took him. And Caleb wrote out his testimony when he was in jail. He said he wanted to start speaking in schools and in churches and tell kids why not to do drugs.
Oh, wow.
And we found it the day after he died. It was really powerful, really powerful. He was quoting scripture. Caleb was a Bible whiz. They went to Awana when they were young, so they learned a lot of Bible verses. And the church they went to did so when he in youth group, kids were like amazed that he knew the Bible so much. And I homeschooled them till Caleb was in 7th grade. So, they were raised in a Christian household. And he read tons of books, and all the books I had were, really, character books, Christian books, like all kinds of things like that. And so, he had a noble character. He did, like, growing up. Teachers called, and from their middle school, their high, both of them, their teachers said that even after that those kids had manners, they knew how to treat people. And they said that even when they no longer had them as their student, they said not a day would go by that they wouldn't pass my classroom and say, hello, Mrs. So-and-so, how are you today? I'm like, that's
Wow.
just that's just how they were. And they said, you don't see kids like that anymore. You could tell that they were raised right. Everything changed so fast. It changed so fast. It's just mind-boggling. Um, anyhow, Caleb was doing a Bible study while in jail. He was doing Celebrate Recovery, actually, while in jail. And they were both trustees. They saw their birth mother in the women's side and
Oh
then
my
talked to,
goodness, in the same prison?
yeah, she had been in, they were told by the sheriff deputies that, oh yeah, we know Nicole. She'd been in there 9 times in 18 years. So she had a lot of drunk driving. And Tyler actually called her when he got out. Caleb, they hadn't seen her in like 5, 6 years. And they were upset with her. And like when her dad died, she called me and said that she's going to give them both $500, and she didn't. Like, never heard from her again. Anytime I'd hear, she'd call me, but she'd call drunk all the time. And so when Kyler got out, she said, um, yeah, I didn't want to do probation. I just wanted to serve my time. She's like, F that. So now I can just, get out and smoke weed and do what I want because I don't have to do any drug testing.
Oh my goodness.
Like, wow, this is what she's teaching them. Not cool. And Caleb was upset that Kyler was talking to her, and he's like, I want nothing to do with her. Anyhow, but Kyler, so 2 weeks in, he got clean. Like, I had to block him from calling me because he would just swear at me. He wanted me to bail him out. It was $8,500. I'm like, I'm not bailing you out. Like 8,500 each. And I'm like, you need to be there. Like, you're clean. Like, just get clean, and then he was furious. I went, what kind of a mother does mail her kid out? And
The kind that wants the
so,
best for them.
right. Right. And I'd always told them that my parents were enablers. The way I saw the way they handled things with my brother, you know, and I wasn't going to be an enabler. So, um, and my ex couldn't do it now because of the divorce. Like, so it was, you know, he couldn't just do it. And he wouldn't either for that kind of money. We just didn't have that kind of money anyway. Um, so Tyler got clean 2 weeks out and he called from someone else's phone. I'm like, who is this calling from the jail? And he's like, Mom, it's me. He's like, please don't hang up. And he's like, Mom, it's all out of my system now. He said, even the vape. And he's like, my skin's clearing up, everything. He's like, I feel so much better. And he's like, and then he starts crying. And he's like, Mom, I'm in here with people with the worst childhoods, people who had, you know, parents on drugs, beating them, um, people who lived in terrible neighborhoods full of drugs, parents in and out of jail and prison. And he said, Mom, I had the best childhood. He said, you raised me right. He said, I have so many great memories. We went to all kinds of cool places and all kinds of fun things. And he said, I'm so lucky you adopted me.
Wow. Wow.
And he apparently had written out 17-point goals for his life. And we found that too the day he died. So we have both of those, and they both wanted to be free. You can see from their writings, they both wanted to be free. And Caleb, you know, I was worried about him because it was COVID and he was supposed to be working. They had opened the restaurants back up. His sisters went back to work, but he wasn't. And, you know, again, I felt like his dad and I weren't on the same page. Um, my boys were both saying, why should we work? We're getting paid more than we would. Oh, the way they got out, by the way, was there was this liberal organization called Michigan Liberation that won a lawsuit against the jail, and they were bailing people out. If they could get a judge to reduce bond to 1,500, they would bail them out. And I said, please don't. I'm like, my boys, they're doing okay. Like, leave them. They need to be they're happy. They said they don't want to do probation. They just want to serve their time and just stay clean and then get out and start their lives. And the judge reduced the bond. So when they, you know, you have these pre-sentencing people calling, and I'm telling them, please don't, you know, don't let them out. Please, they need rehab. And anyhow, Kyler didn't get rehab. They gave him tether, and he went to live with a kid who had been a foster child who had aged out of the system. And so this kid had like free housing. So he went and stayed with him. But he was a kid who I knew struggled with substance use disorder. And Caleb was going to come stay with me, but first they sent him to rehab, but it wasn't real rehab. It was a flap house. It was a halfway house. It was like the places my brother went to years earlier in Pontiac, Michigan. And they just renamed themselves rehab so they could get federal, state, and county money
Sure.
by calling themselves rehab. And there was nothing about it that was rehab. They were able to go for walks in the neighborhood every day. We're in a drug infested neighborhood where people would buy drugs when they were out walking. The only thing that could even remotely be considered therapy was they had group sessions where they didn't have to talk. They could just sit there, which is what Caleb did. Like, it wasn't rehab. I thought he was going to get real rehab. What a waste of money to think that we have all those federal dollars that are going to that.
Yes.
You know, and it's just insane. Um, And then my ex-husband arranged for my son for Caleb to get a car because they had all this money from the government for COVID, right? So all of a sudden he had money, which I told him to control the money. So my ex-husband controlled Caleb's money. I didn't know he wasn't controlling Kyler's money. So Kyler was using his money from the government to pay for drugs. And Caleb used this car. Bob was out of town with the girls out of state. And so I was home alone with Caleb, and Bob arranged for his friend to bring him over this car. And I was gone that morning, and within 20 minutes, Caleb crashed it. He had gone
Oh
and
my
gotten
goodness.
drugs, crashed the car. And so it was like a fender bender kind of thing. And then I could see clearly Caleb's on drugs again. And I was scared. And he asked me to just get him. I told Bob, come right home, and he wanted me to get him his favorite food. I was like, okay, just stay in with me. Don't go anywhere. We're just gonna stay home. I'm gonna stay with you. And begged him to tell me what he was doing, and he said nothing. And then he said, well, it's marijuana. And I'm like, are you doing Xanax? Are you doing Xanax? And he's like, no, it's marijuana. Kyler's on the phone. Kyler's saying, Mom, it's just pot. It's just weed. Don't worry. And but his eyes didn't look right. And he said, just okay, get me this food. So I went and got his food. And then he was sitting in his car in the driveway vaping. And I thought, well, what's he doing in his car? I'm like, oh, he's vaping. I'm like, okay, well, he knows not supposed to vape in the house. So all right, he's in the car. And then I get out of my car, and all of a sudden he pulls out of the driveway and he goes up into the neighbor's yard in his car. I'm like, what are you doing? Oh my gosh, you're gonna get yourself killed. You're gonna kill somebody. What are you doing? Stop, get out of the car, get out of the car. And I could see he was trying to get in gear, but he was like delirious. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's gonna hit me. And so I backed away, and he just took off. And called him, and then he said he's going to his friend's house, who's like lives close, his best friend. And so I call his best friend, and I told him when he gets there, take his keys, you know. And because I didn't know what else to do. Am I going to chase him down? It's like the police aren't going to get him by the time he gets, to his friend's house. And we had already called saying that he was violating parole, that both boys are violating parole, like they're not doing their drug testing, they're not working. We wanted them back in jail, or violating their probation, not parole. And the probation department said, we're aware that they're violating, but their hearing is set for September, like mid-September. So like 2 months out. It was COVID. They didn't want to pick anybody up. They didn't want anybody in jail. Okay. They wanted them all out. So he his friend calls back, and he's like, he never showed up. He's not here. And so I call Caleb again, and clearly he's not driving. I could tell. And he said, oh, I'm sitting here, he said, with another friend of his, Noah. And I'm like, okay, you should not be driving. You cannot drive. Just let me talk to Noah. Put Noah on the phone. And then he hangs up the phone. Well, then I call Noah, and Noah said, I haven't seen him in like 4 months.
Oh my goodness.
He's like, Caleb's mad at me because I wouldn't drive him to go get drugs. He's like, I'm not going to drive you to get yourself killed. And I'm like, I didn't ask like even what he meant by that, but he he had struggled with drugs when he was 13, and he'd been clean since that age. So I knew he's like super anti-drugs, and he's like, he's not, you know, coming to see me. He's going to see his brother. And they're not supposed to see each other. It's part of their probation.
Oh,
They're not allowed
wow.
to see each other. And Caleb won't answer, and then a couple hours later I get a call. and he's been arrested. He was under the influence. And I'm like, are you hurt? Did anybody get hurt? Did you crash? No. I'm like, oh, thank God you're safe. And he's like, bail me out. It's $150 bond. And I'm like, what? And he had been crying earlier in the day saying, I need to be in jail. I need to go back to jail. I can't do it. I can't do probation. I just need to go back to jail. I'm like, what are you doing, Caleb? What's going on? I'm crying. And um, what's going, just tell me what's going on. And that's when he just said, oh, it's just marijuana. And he's like, but I need to go back to jail. I can't do it. And so I'm like, thank God you're safe. You're going to go back to jail. You're okay. And anyhow, he's upset with me because I'm like, no. I'm like, how could they give you a $150 bond? They know you violated probation. Again, judge didn't care. The magistrate didn't care. They don't want anybody going to jail. It's the middle of COVID, the peak of, right?
Right.
That summer, 2020, July 2020. And how could they give you only $150 bond? Are they crazy? And so I told Bob what's going on, and like, don't bail him out. And he's like, of course not. Then Kyler starts calling, swearing at me. What kind of a mother doesn't bail her kid out for
Oh my God.
$150? Like, what's the man? What the F is wrong with you? And he can't because he's on tether, so he can't leave to go bail his brother out. So then I get a call from their birth mother. Kyler had called the birth mother, and she's swearing at me.
Oh my
And I
goodness.
said, please do not bail him out. Please do not bail him out. Caleb was crying. They're safe now, please. She did.
Oh
Caleb hadn't seen her in 5-6 years. She bailed them out. So when they died, she knew. She knew. And she struggled with that. And she called me crying. Um, then a few days later, they both called to apologize. Caleb came back to stay with me. Tyler apologized for swearing at me. They called me on my birthday. He called me on my birthday, July 22nd. So it was 10 days before they died that Caleb had been arrested. And he would have still been alive. I would have made sure when he got out that he would have gone over straight to real rehab. Tyler got off tether the day before they died. And again, it was clear that Caleb was doing drugs again. He had posted something on Snapchat with drugs, with pills. And his cousin alerted my daughter, and my daughter told me, and we were all afraid, like, of having him in the house because we knew that he could be violent if he was doing what we thought was Xanax. And so I asked my ex-husband to pick him up, and at the same time, Kyler was freaking out because he was getting off tether, and he finished school. He graduated from school that day. He did online school to finish. And the foster kid who he had been staying with had a caseworker visit that day, checking up on him, and said, what are you doing here? Saw him on tether. I'm like, she's like, you can't be here. You're not allowed to be living here.
Right.
And so Kyler's freaking out. He has no place to stay. And he was clearly doing drugs again because he would get frantic, when he was on drugs. And so Bob said he was going to pick them both, go get Kyler, take Caleb. And Caleb comes to me and he says to me before he left, he packed his stuff. And he says, what's this, Mom, about you tripping on me? And they used to talk like that kind of like, rap kind of talk. Like, and I'm like, you guys, we're not raised in the hood. Like, you guys are from
Right.
Rochester Hills, Michigan. Like, why do you talk like that? If you actually like you can get yourself hurt. Go around talking like that, acting like that's who you are. Like, what are you doing? But at any rate, when he said it that day, instead of like saying, "What are you doing?" I just said, "Caleb, I'm really worried about you." I said, "A lot of people are worried about you." And I started crying. And he immediately changed his demeanor. And I threw my arms around him and I said, "I love you so much." And he says, "I love you too, Mom." And then I said it again. I said, "I love you so much." He said, "I love you too, Mom." And those were our last words.
I'm going to pause there. Next Sunday is part 2 of our conversation with Rebecca, where she delves into her intense grief after having lost 2 of her sons on the same evening to fentanyl poisoning. She will also tell us about her activism in the fentanyl awareness community. And she also talks about her work with women who have been raped, have been impregnated, and who go on to provide another family a beautiful child through adoption. So I hope you'll join us then. And please do subscribe to whatever channel you are listening to us on. Very important so that we can bring more awareness about fentanyl poisoning to all those who need to hear it. Bless you and have a wonderful week.